Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's hard to believe, but we're actually gathering here for the closing plenary session of the 2016 FOS conference. So let me just ask you, has it been a good conference? As I said before, we really appreciate all the positive feedback that we have received from so many of you in the room. We ask that you please give us constructive criticism as well. We need your suggestions for how we can make this a better conference. As I said yesterday, we want you to walk away thinking that was the best FOS conference ever, and we want you to think that every single year. So the only way we can do that is with your continual input. And if you did not fill out the evaluation form in its paper iteration, you are welcome to fill it out in an online version as well, which will be linked from our conference website, but there's the link, www.tiny.cc/FOS 2016. So either through the paper form or the online form, whatever is your preferred format, we hope that you give us conference feedback. It's very important to us. I also want to extend a special welcome to Bill Fulton. Bill's sitting in the back of the room, and he's right there. Bill is the director of the Kinder Institute at Rice University, which is doing some very innovative work in local elections data from around the country, and are just releasing a new report on mayoral elections in California. So if you have an interest in that, please see Bill Fulton from Rice University. And where's David Becker from Pew? He left. Okay, so I wanted to introduce David. I promised I would. I've had several people come up and ask me about the ERIC program, and maybe we'll have a little touch on that during this panel discussion, but I wanted to introduce David as an expert on the ERIC initiative, which started at Pew and was spun out and has been referenced in several presentations today. And a final announcement before we begin, and that is that a lot of the FOS member organizations have been producing tools and resources that make it easier for election administrators to modernize their systems, their procedures, to understand how to better provide accessibility for voters with disabilities or limited English proficiency voters, how to design easier, simpler, plain language voter guides, how to train poll workers. There are a great number of reports that have been issued that have toolkits that are accessible to all of you. And at future California elections, we have gathered all of those resources and tools together in what we call the Voter Experience Index. And we launched this last summer at the summer annual meeting of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials. And it has been updated continually since then. So if you attended breakout sessions and you heard people refer to this panel or to that report or to that toolkit or to that work that was being done, and you leave the conference sort of informed that there is a wide array of resources out there, but you're just not sure now how to access those resources, chances are you can find it at the Voting Experience Index, which is divided into kind of three temporal phases: the voter registration process, the voter information process, and then the actual voting process. And then some of the major issues that the toolkits address are on this axis with plain language, language access, disability, et cetera. So we encourage you to use the Voter Experience Index. There are flyers on the table that have the link. It's also easily discoverable from the Future of California Elections homepage. And with that, we're going to move to our closing plenary session. And unfortunately, two of the speakers that we had expected to participate in this session were not able to be with us today. Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez was not able to be here. She, of course, was the author of Assembly Bill 1641. Did I just say that wrong? 1461. I knew I did that. It's been a long conference. Assembly Bill 1461, and which was the automated voter registration bill enacted into law last year. And she sends her sincere regrets to all of you that she could not be here. Also, the chair of the Assembly Elections Committee, Assemblymember Sebastian Ridley Thomas, had a last-minute scheduling issue, was not able to be with us this morning. His district director, Scott Malson, has agreed to come and sit in on his behalf. As district director, Scott manages the Assemblyman's office here in Los Angeles. He's actually a former elected official himself, having served as a mayor and council member of Culver City, which is a community of about 40,000 people on the west side of Los Angeles. So welcome, Scott, and we thank you for representing the chairman today. We have asked, and maybe conscripted is a better word to use, Kathy Fung, who's the executive director of California Common Cause, to join this plenary session because we think that her knowledge and experience overlaps nicely with many of the topics we expect to discuss this morning. Kathy, as executive director, has really been active in championing election and redistricting reform, government sunshine and accountability laws, campaign finance reform laws, and the voting rights of traditionally disenfranchised Californians. She has spearheaded Common Cause's successful efforts to pass initiatives, including the one which created California's Independent Redistricting Commission. It's really a national model. And so, Kathy, thank you so much for agreeing to pitch in and help us out here.
I was the only one in the hall.
That's what you get for not going to a breakout session.
You get conscripted.
So, seated closest to me is someone who's no stranger to many of you in this room, James Schwab, who is the Chief of Legislative Affairs for California Secretary of State Alex Padilla. James has probably, next to the Secretary of State himself, I think James has the hardest job in the office, which is that he has to deal with not just the constituency of all of us, but he has to deal with a constituency of 120 legislators and try to help the Secretary of State implement his vision through legislation. And he tracks and monitors hundreds of bills. He also works on congressional legislative proposals, so he's got an eye on the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. Prior to working for the Secretary of State, he worked for then State Senator Alex Padilla and focused on a great number of issues for the state senator. And he's really a policy wonk. I see a lot of heads nodding. I mean, those of you that know James know he knows politics inside and out, but he's a policy wonk at heart, and he's done tremendous work in this field of election modernization. But he also has expertise in education, labor, industrial relations, economic development, seismic safety. So he's got quite a broad array of expertise that he brought. But he's done a terrific job working with all of us. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again, that under this Secretary of State, and thanks in no small part to the work of James Schwab, there has been just an unprecedented level of transparency, community outreach, inclusiveness, and real honest listening to what advocates within the community have been asking of the Secretary of State's office. And so it's been a tremendous sea change and one that is very, very welcome, and we thank you for that, James. So, and last but not least, is the Honorable Ben Allen, who we're really delighted, Senator, that you took time out of your extremely busy schedule to be with us. And it's a great closing opportunity for this conference where we have spent a day and a half exploring in great detail, as you saw from our conference program, a broad array of issues around how to modernize the election system, how to expand participation, how to bring underrepresented groups to bear in the political process. And this audience, which is a great mixture of election administrators, the people that we trust every day to implement reform and to continually manage the system with the highest levels of integrity, are sitting here with community activists and with civil rights organizations and this, I believe this is the only place in the country where you will find an election. I see heads shaking. This is the only place in the country where you'll find such a disparate group of people who come together in mutual respect and with great open communication about the issues. And there are great disagreements in this room, but they are expressed with respect and with appreciation, with an honest sense to learn from each other. And so this is a very unique conference across the national landscape. And I had one election administrator say to me before this session began, I'm really impressed with how well the community activists that are here are interested in understanding the complexity of our job. And that really is a really resonant thought with me, because our election administrators are asked to do more with less every day of the week, and they have to rebuild the airplane while it's in flight, which is always a difficult challenge. And so I really appreciated that comment. But Senator, the audience is anxious to hear from you and not me. Senator Ben Allen is the chair of the Senate Elections and Constitutional Amendments Committee, a job which he took upon entering the state Senate and has performed extremely well. His district covers the West Side, Hollywood, and South Bay communities of LA County. He is also on the state legislature's Joint Committee on the Arts. He's on the Senate Budget Committee and the Budget Subcommittee that oversees the state's education budget, the Veterans Affairs Committee, the Natural Resources and Water Committee, Transportation and Housing Committee. So you've got a lot on your plate, sir. He's a former board member and board president of the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. He was a lecturer at the UCLA School of Law. I'm always impressed to say that Senator Allen has degrees from Harvard, Cambridge, and Berkeley. So that is a very sophisticated arsenal of degrees. But most of all, similar to what I said about Secretary Padilla, we in the election reform community have just been really appreciative and impressed with how accessible, Senator, you have been to all the voices in this community, and how, as you craft legislation, you have sought to include people in the front side of drafting legislation as opposed to surprising them on the back side of the process. And it's just been a wonderful working relationship, and we thank you for that. And so we'd like you to come to the podium and begin the panel. Please welcome Senator Ben Allen.
Thank you so much, everybody, and it's wonderful to be here. So one of the things I suspect that part of the challenge from my fellow colleagues in the legislature is that folks here may know that we're now just starting the California Democratic Convention up in San Jose. And so we were in session late, at least in the Budget Committee in Sacramento yesterday, and we're going to be getting started. We're getting started today up in San Jose. So, but I wanted to come down here to be here at this conference. It is like coming home. This is such a wonderful elections nerd fest, and I feel right at home with you guys. You know, I love the energy and the passion, the commitment, the attention to detail, all of the interest that is in this room. And you guys throw a wonderful conference, and I just think I've been so impressed in stepping into this new position. Is that you, Kathy? Are you undermining the process?
So sorry.
Common. Good. All right. So I've just been so impressed with the robust advocacy community, how well it works with the folks in government who are trying to implement some of these changes, and it's exciting to be in a state where we're really all trying to work together to increase the franchise. And you know, particularly when you look elsewhere in the country and you look at some of the ridiculous things that are being proposed, and in some cases implemented in some other states that seek to reduce popular representation and engagement, I just continue to feel very fortunate to be a Californian where we're actually looking for ways to get more people involved in the process and not less. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that the legislature has been doing over the past few years that are pretty big deals. It's certainly very different than what we've been seeing in other states. So first of all, online voter registration. It started in 2012, been working pretty well. Election day voter registration, which will commence in 2017, another major reform. Permitting of the pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, also beginning next year. Permitting timely postmarked ballots to be accepted up to 3 days after the election. And then, of course, perhaps most important for the future, adding actual instruction on how to register to vote and cast a ballot to our high school civics curriculum starting as early as next fall. So those are some things that were done in prior sessions by the legislature. But of course, we all saw our terrible voter turnout in the 2014 election. And it reminds us that voter participation really needs to be one of the high priorities of our current legislative session. And the legislature has responded in turn. So we've started studying other states. We went to Colorado. I've actually already been twice now to look at what they've done, to observe their electoral system. We've held 3 oversight hearings. We've spent countless hours debating, negotiating, crafting new policies that I'm going to talk about. As a result, we enacted several groundbreaking bills in 2015, including Assemblymember Gonzalez's new Motor Voter Act, which was just so important. And we really came to terms with the fact that voter registration was simply a barrier to entry. And it was a barrier to entry that most impacted young people. That there was an enormous uptick in registration between 18 and 35. By the time you're about 35, if you're going to be registered, you were already registered in general. But there were so many young people who were disenfranchised because they'd never gotten around. No one had ever registered them, and when they were 20 years old and they weren't able to go vote. It was not a privacy issue. I mean, any police officer could find out within about 30 seconds your voter eligibility data, very, very quickly within a couple clicks of a government database button. And that's one of the reasons why we felt it was so important to pass Assemblymember Gonzalez's bill. A couple other major victories I should mention. I had SB 439, which will permit early election day voter registration and voting at satellite offices, multiple satellite offices per county. And it also provides for certification of ballot on demand systems and electronic poll books. That's going to be really important for some of the long-term plans that we have. There was AB 477 by Assemblymember Mullen, which will give voters up to 8 days after the election to sign their mailed ballot if they forgot to do so. SB 365 by Senator Pavley will officially authorize the use of vote by mail drop-off locations and also establish guidelines for them. SB 415 by Senator Wesso will pave the way for more local elections to be consolidated with higher turnout statewide elections. That was a real sleeper and a very interesting bill to take a look at. SB 589, Senator Block, will protect the voting rights of eligible persons who are subject to conservatorships if they express a desire to participate in the voting process. Now, I think probably, besides Assemblymember Gonzalez's bill, the most significant bill that was introduced last year is my SB 450, which is still making its way through the process. We're working very closely with the Secretary of State's office, Senator Hertzberg, others. But I think it really does, represent the most fundamental change of all. And SB 450 permits counties to conduct elections in a manner similar to Colorado. And so instead of neighborhood polling places open only on election day, participating counties would send every voter a ballot in the mail and provide different options, multiple options, various options for voting and returning that ballot, including numerous drop-off boxes, which are available 28 days prior to the election. And then, of course, we'd have centrally located vote centers that were open for up to 10 days prior to the election, each of which will accommodate any voter in the county. In fact, in Colorado, they'll soon be at a place where you'll be able to vote anywhere in the state for 10 days before Election Day at any one of these vote centers, and it's moving along really nicely. Of course, that also depends on a strong database that we're also working on, and hopefully, we're almost there. We're the only state in the country that's still out of compliance with the Help America Vote Act, and it's really gotten us behind. But we're finally making progress there. So, from my perspective, and I think those of us who are passionate about SB 450, there's just simply no excuse for making the act of voting difficult. It should be convenient. Voters should have options when, regarding when, how, and where they choose to cast their ballots. Not everyone likes to vote by mail. A lot of people do. A lot of people plan to vote on Election Day, but for whatever reason, things happen, and it's so important for them to have a little more time. People can stop off after work for people might want to vote on the weekend. People want to vote in person. We want to make it easier for people. Colorado's experience has been remarkable, and their system goes way beyond the all-mail only model that's used in Oregon and Washington. And I think that given the demographics of California's electorate, I don't believe that an all-mail only system would serve us well here. I think ultimately it's good to do mail, but there's a lot of people who want to vote in person for a lot of different reasons, and the vote centers can help. But under an early vote center model, voters would be able to receive language assistance. They'd be able to use accessible voting equipment if needed. And I'm just excited about what this offers, and I really urge you to take a close look at it. We're going to be making the roadshow at the convention this weekend and urging our colleagues and others in the party, many of whom I think have gotten very used to a particular way of running elections. We ultimately making the case to them that it is in everybody's interest, it's in California's interest to boost turnout and engage more and more of our population. I also think, of course, and I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's time to seriously reconsider where elections and voter outreach falls in the hierarchy of state and local funding priorities. It's just ridiculous. You think about how vitally important the system, our electoral system is, and how woefully underfunded it is. And I'm aware that the state's failed to fund election-related mandates the last several years for such important milestones as permanent no-excuse voting by mail. These are policies that voters now take for granted, and they just simply shouldn't be denied to them because of funding problems. You know, the state and federal governments have made elections a budget priority in the past, and they can do so again. We can't expect substantial results unless we're willing to make a substantial investment. And so our committee, the Senate Committee on Elections and Constitutional Amendments, will be holding an oversight hearing on just this issue, elections funding, on March 1st. Several participants in this conference, including the Secretary of State and county elections officials and public interest groups, will be joining us. And so I very much welcome you to come to that hearing in Sacramento, participate in it. It will be live streamed. Please consider making public comment there, because we're really hoping that this will be an opportunity to bring people together and really talk about this funding issue. It's been a crisis. It's been a problem. And particularly as the economy picks up and there's a little bit more money in the budget, we really need to get to investing in those critical elections programs that make such a difference in terms of voter turnout and voter participation and engagement. So I look forward to a robust discussion with the panelists today. I just want to thank you for your tireless advocacy to help make the California democratic system work better, be more inclusive, more engaging. It's all part of creating a more robust civic life for our citizens and for our communities and for our people. So thank you for your engagement, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Senator. That was well said. So next we're going to hear from James Schwab. Welcome, James.
Thank you. I'm just going to sit down. More comfortable. You guys hear me? The mic's on? So Senator Allen did a great job on looking at what's out there in election policy. So I'm going to dive a little deep on some of the questions I've been hearing from folks at the conference today, and obviously ongoing. And one of the big ones is the new motor voter, automatic registration, automated registration, and where are we at in that process. And so it's important to remember that, one, the new motor voter law, the target date to go live and start registering voters is July 2017. So until then, we're going to be working with the DMV, with advocates and stakeholders to make sure it's rolled out right. Those conversations are happening. If you want to be involved, please reach out to us, and we can get you involved in that process. But over the next year and a half, we'll be making sure that the process is smooth, that there's language accessibility, that there's disabled accessibility. And so that's a big thing to watch out for, because we want to make sure that rolls out right. We don't want fiasco in July 2017. We want to be registering people and making sure we're capturing all the information we need. Language preference, party preference, if you want to vote by mail, if you want to be a poll worker. So that's a very important thing to watch over the next year and a half. But there's going to be sort of a midway step between now and July, and that's the DMV is going to be implementing essentially a paperless, semi-paperless voter registration system where you're going to be entering a lot of your information on a touch screen or electronic device. And that's going to mean for election officials, you're not going to be getting voter registration forms from the DMV. They've eliminated that. They're going to be eliminating that this year, April and May. And it's going to be sent electronically to VoCal and CalVoter until then. So that's coming. That'll be April, May. We expect that to have a little uptick in voter registration because it's going to streamline it. It's going to be semi-paperless. So I think that's going to be an important thing to watch out for. As improved voter registration. So we'll have that little small win between now and July 2017 when new motor voter takes place. And I think there's also been a debate on, is it automatic, is it automated, what is it? I'm just going to call it AVR. And so you can figure out what the A means. I'll let you determine that. But essentially it's, I think about it as flipping the voter registration form on its head, where the first question we ask you is, are you eligible to vote, and do you meet these eligibility requirements? And you test that you are eligible to vote, just like you do today under penalty of perjury. And if you say yes to that, you're going to be registered to vote. And then we'll capture your party preference, your language preference, and so forth, and then provide an opportunity to opt out if you choose. So that's sort of the difference. If you were here yesterday and you heard from the Oregon Secretary of State, that's the slight difference in what we're doing here in California versus Oregon, which is based on sort of the documents that you bring to the DMV as part of your application process. So That's still all the details that are being worked out, again, over the next year and a half with the DMV and stakeholders, but that's the general concept of new motor voter. And given that a large swath of the state, around 90% have driver's license and state IDs, over time, we're going to take a huge chunk out of the over 7 million eligible but unregistered voters in California. So we're excited to see that roll out. And as soon as, not even as soon as the ink was dry on new motor voter, where can we go next? Can we go to Cover California? Can we go to colleges and universities? What's next for automatic registration, automated registration? And I think that's great, and I think we need to start thinking about that. But I don't see the political will to have that done this year in a bill. I think we can start having those conversations, but I think folks will want to see how it rolls out the DMV and get that right before they think about taking it to other places. Those involved in the process, the new motor voter bill was not the easiest thing to get passed, and so I think folks want to break from that.
Happened pretty fast.
So that's sort of where we're at with new motor voter, and I think that's going to be an exciting thing to look forward to the next year and a half. The other big push from our office is requesting funds for voting systems, and we roughly think it's around $450 million that we'll be requesting. Not the biggest budget request, but it's a sizable chunk that we'll be asking for, and so we're having discussions with the Department of Finance and the Governor's Office about that. It's positive discussions, but we're going to need everyone to make the counties know what situation they're in, and we need to get that funding sooner rather than later. And it's, ideally you have, the SB 450 and you have new funding for voting systems, but with or without any new policies, counties need this money. And so I think we're going to need your help on that. Senator Allen's hearing on Tuesday is going to help tee that off. There's going to be an op-ed in Sunday East Bay Area news papers, and probably the Mercury News too, from the Secretary and Neil Kelly making the case that if we don't get funding for new voting systems, it's not too far off that we might have our own Bush v. Gore and a failed election. So please help us make that request and get the funding out of the budget. And I'll close with I think something that's really cool that I don't think I've seen in the election world, and that's I won't call her out because I won't embarrass her, but we have a staffer from the Department of Finance here, and they're working on how do we solve the funding mandate for the ongoing election costs. And I haven't seen that before, and she's excited. She learned a lot from you guys. All the research and money and funding that you guys are putting into stuff is making a difference. It's going to drive policy in Sacramento. And so I think that's something to be proud of. I think that's why we do this conference. And I was happy to see that she was excited and motivated about all the ideas that you guys brought to the table. So I really, this is why I do the conference. So you can probably guess who she is. She's probably embarrassed and laughing in front of me. But
All right.
I didn't want to put her on the spot. Now you're gonna be hassled right after you walk out of here. Just run out the door. And then I think something that I want to just put out there is the lens from which we're kind of viewing what we're doing in our office, and the Secretary's sort of philosophy in this approach, and that's looking at the pipeline of getting to casting a ballot, and that what's the starting point, and then how do you get to casting a ballot? Well, it starts with citizenship. And so in our work, we're looking at how do we promote becoming a citizen. And the Secretary, as you probably heard a story, talks about how he didn't grow up with the tradition of voting because his parents weren't citizens. And it really took teachers and peers and colleagues to push him to register to vote for the first time and then become engaged. And so there's state money being allocated to help folks become citizens in California. And let's take advantage of that. Let's not only get them to become citizens, let's get them civically engaged. Let's get them registered to vote. Let's get them active in elections. Next up is voter registration. And obviously you've seen the work we're doing with the new motor voter law and we're working on that. But we're moving barriers to voter registration. I think next up is election administration. How do we get ballots out to people? How do we set up polling places or vote centers? And so reimagining that and providing voters with new options about how, when, and where they can vote is sort of the philosophy we're approaching. And that you can see that in 450 is coming to agreement with everyone here on how do we do early voting? How do we do same-day registration? And the right way to strike the balance between providing voters new tools, but also making sure that we're not burdening the county registrars. So we're taking that philosophy on improving election administration. And lastly, something that we're still thinking about, and it's the harder part of what we do, is how do you solve the voter motivation problem? Why do people vote? Why don't they vote? And I think that's something that we need to focus on for the future of California elections, is we're going to make it easy to register, easy to cast a ballot, but how about the motivation and education part of it? And as Senator Allen alluded to, getting more civics education into the classroom, building that tradition in families that didn't have the tradition of voting, right? And I think that's the area for us where we're trying to crack that nut is how do you do that? How do you motivate voters? As a government agency, how can we promote that? So that's sort of the philosophy we're looking at, is the pipeline of becoming a citizen to casting a ballot, and what do we do along the way to remove the barriers for folks. So perfect timing.
You brought it in right on the numbers. Thank you, James. Next, we'll hear from Kathy Fung.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of the laws that are on the horizon, but I want to start first by giving a little bit of context, because I think sometimes it's important to remember why we're doing a lot of this. This is definitely a nerd fest, but I think all of us come to this because something happened in our lives or something happened to people that we care about that motivates us to make this the passion. Otherwise, why else would you care about how you count ballots or what the ratios should be of vote centers to human beings? And for me, I think about sort of two anecdotes. One is in my own family. I've now tutored a number of people to be able to understand the English questions in the citizenship test so that they could eventually be able to pronounce the governor's name and say what the three branches of government are and say who the Supreme Court justices are in case they're asked in preparation for a test to become a citizen. And the excitement of becoming that citizen translates into a desire to ask, so what next? What I will say is there's a pretty big hurdle from I finally passed that citizenship test, which for many people, those are questions that I'm not sure most of us who are born in the US could even answer without a little bit of assistance, to how do I become a regularly participating voter or in any other way civically engaged. And that's pretty intimidating for a lot of people. The ballot that we get is gigantic. First time you get it's in English. It feels like there's a lot of talk about certain candidates at the presidential level, but there's almost no talk about all these other people. I don't understand that. And then when you get down to the ballot propositions and measures, it's particularly hard, right? Even when there's plain language written about it, we're asking people to make big policy decisions, and it's a heavy burden for all of us, right? So part of this is how do we create a culture of allowing people to enter into participating in the civic space at the pace that they're ready? How do we make sure that it's in the languages that they understand? How do we have a conversation about not just the top of the ballot, but all the way down so that people feel confident to be able to cast that? And how do we meet people where they're ready to kind of interact with us, right? That all sounds theoretical until we start talking about what those bills are going to incorporate. My second anecdote is, for many, many years, I worked with what is now the Asian Americans Advancing Justice in Los Angeles. And we monitored hundreds of poll sites. And I remember going to a lot of poll sites. This was all before Dean Logan, so he's not responsible for any of this. But there were a lot of poll sites where they were in garages, they were in Crazy Elks Club where the lady was dressed head to toe in green fur. You know, they had drunken poll workers. You know, there were places where, you know, some guy would stand on the lawn and tell you to get off of his lawn, even though that was a designated poll site. You know, there were places where, again, all before Dean Logan's time, there were places where, quite honestly, the poll workers felt overwhelmed by the number of people who were coming in who did not speak English as their first language, and whose way of dealing with that was to tell people, regular voters, come to the front of the line. Everybody else, go to the back of the line. If you don't speak English, we'll get to you after we help the regular voters. And standing in line were people who were like my aunt, right? First-time voters, very, very nervous about this, wanting to do the right thing, feeling a little bit embarrassed that their English wasn't so great, and being told to go to the back of the line because they couldn't communicate their name to the person who was the roster checker. And imagine the embarrassment and whether or not you're ever going to show up again, right? And so how do we meet people where they're at? So I think, you know, a lot of the bills that we do, you know, Common Cause could not be sort of more wonky than the most wonky of organizations, right? But a lot of the bills that we do sort of take that personal experience into account. We are champions of SB 450, which would create what we think of as being full service voting. And part of the reason is that I would love for Dean Logan, who has to right now operate 4,500 or 5,000 poll sites, to have the option to be choosier and to find centrally located locations that are well recognized, convenient to people on their way to work or, you know, close to their home, that are welcoming, and where he can be choosier about who runs those poll sites, right? Instead of deploying 25,000 people, and frankly, you don't have a whole lot of choice sometimes. You get who comes in. Instead, being able to say, let's pick the best of the best and make sure that they're trained and they're going to be speaking. They're going to be a little model United Nations in every single one of those vote centers. They're going to be welcoming. They're going to know how to run the tech. They're going to know how to answer the questions. They'll know how to assist people who have disability needs, right? Why not have first-class service at every vote center as opposed to horrible service in a lot of polling places? And why not also say you don't have to necessarily just go to the polling place that is close to where you live, but let's think about the transit routes that people are going to and acknowledge that sometimes maybe the best time to vote is after I've dropped off my kid, but not just before work because I'm rushing to catch the bus to go, but it might be on my lunch hour. So maybe I need to go someplace that's close to where I work. Or maybe it's on my way home after I picked up my kid, but it's not exactly the one that's closest to home. And having vote centers that allow people to drop in anywhere within the county, right? And for that vote center to be able to pull up your correct ballot and assist you in your language and provide the assistance that you need if you have a disability, all that would be a game changer, right? I'm excited because folks like Dean Logan, who is the Registrar of Los Angeles, is not only thinking about the vote center model, but also about a whole new way of giving people a way to cast their ballot, right? A voting system that maybe we're pre-marking our ballot on a cell phone and we're waving it in front so it's a fast pass, right? He's got all these great innovations. That would all be made possible if we rethought how we deploy our elections to meet people where they're at. So when we support something like 450, it's because it's about making sure that everybody who comes into the system, and if we're successful and another 7 million people come in, that their first interaction is one that is welcoming, it's receptive, it's high quality, and it's in and out. They come out and they've got their sticker and they're proud of it, but they're also, it's not something that had to occupy, 3 hours of their day or, lots and lots of planning to fit into their busy lives. We have a report, which I won't go through too much, but, and Leela Pedersen, who's sitting here, talked a little bit about it. It talks about some of the recommendations that we've been thinking about. It disappeared into the papers, right, this one, and if people need a copy. It talks about what we can learn from Colorado, right? The good thing is that this vote center idea is not new, right? It's been tested in a number of different places, Colorado, Nevada, other places. So we've got a lot to learn from. And in a state like California, as diverse as we are, and with the kind of challenges that we have in not only getting people to become citizens and then register to vote and then participate to vote, we need to have every tool in the toolkit at our dispense. We talked a little bit about a bill that is going to come online that I think is also going to be a game changer. So of all the things, and we're excited about a lot of them, right? I think SB 415, Senator Hueso's bill, that would require all cities to eventually move to a standardized voting calendar, right? So an election day that is synced up with the June and November elections in the even year is huge. I can't tell you, I don't know that this is necessarily a problem all throughout the state, but certainly in Southern California, we have, in 1 year, you can have 5, 6 elections, and it's very confusing for voters. Right? And part of that is because we've got a lot of little local jurisdictions that have all picked their own election date. And then imagine the expense at the local level of having to deploy that, but also how do you educate people what the election day is? Everybody's focused on big ones like the presidential year. You don't have so much conversation when it comes to city council, water board, you go on down the line, school board, and that's when you start to have real low voter turnout. Synchronizing it would be great because we'd not only get to a place where voters could get onto a regular schedule of elections and understand, okay, June, November, it's just like that, right? It happens in a regular way. But also, I think it would really help with election administration, right? From that perspective, being able to, again, ensure that you have high-quality elections delivered would be tremendous. And just to end with one last piece. James, you talked about the last part of that pipeline being voter motivation. And I think one piece clearly is investing in voter education. I'm going to put out there that the other piece of it is, and I think we saw this in polls like PPIC, sometimes, or maybe a lot of times, voters feel cynical about whether their vote counts. And so the other piece that we spend a lot of time thinking about is what kind of institutional or structural changes can we make to have better confidence in what the outcomes are, a belief that the candidates who are running aren't bought by special interest money, a belief that there's a real choice in who I get to cast a ballot for, and that ultimately the ballot that I cast will count towards my choice. And so I think that there's a lot of room for really tackling that last piece of the pipeline. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kathy. As I mentioned before, Scott is the district director for Assemblymember Sebastian Ridley Thomas, who could not, unfortunately, be with us here today. But Scott has brought a prepared statement that he'd like to share with you from the chairman.
Yes. Can you all hear me? Is the microphone on?
I don't think it's on. Maybe is the little box showing the on switch in the right?
It is on.
Oh, now we kind of heard you there, yeah. You might have a bad mic, Scott, so if you kind of maybe hold it up here like a microphone, it might work.
It is working.
Yeah,
okay.
Thanks.
Speak like this. Good morning.
All right, we're going to Plan B.
Plan B is the handheld mic.
My apologies.
Good morning, everybody. Boy, there's so many interesting topics that have been brought up, and as somebody who's participated in the electoral process in a city that is really a model of civic engagement, it spurs so many thoughts, and there really is an awful lot of interesting things to explore. consolidated elections and other issues relating to voter turnout. But lest there be any confusion, what I want to do is to read the Assembly member's statement unedited, despite the fact that some of the subjects that have been spoken about by other speakers are in here rather than edit the statement on the fly. I'm just simply going to read it as is. So, for a long time, California's ability to modernize our election policies and procedures has been hampered by the delayed development of a new statewide voter registration database. As you've heard, we're getting very close to having that new voter registration database known as VoteCal in place as the official voter registration database for the state. The certification of VoteCal as the database of record for the state of California will trigger the implementation of a number of new laws that are designed to improve voter participation. Laws allowing pre-registration by 16 and 17-year-olds, conditional voter registration or same-day voter registration, and modernization of the distribution of official election materials will go into effect on January 1st following the certification of the VoteCal system by the Secretary of State. The VoteCal system will also include a new statewide customer service website that will allow voters to get information about their polling place location, eligibility to vote in upcoming elections, and the status of their vote by mail or provisional ballots. Last year, the Assembly member authored AB 1020, which was sponsored by Secretary of State Padilla, to update California law to prepare for and facilitate the deployment of the VoteCal system. Once VoteCal is in place, AB 1020 will help streamline voter registration updates and voter file maintenance so that voters' registrations are seamlessly updated. Last year's legislative session also saw other important developments in streamlining and improving voter registration procedures. As part of the budget process, the legislature and the governor took steps to significantly streamline voter registration at the Department of Motor Vehicles. That new process should be in place in the next few months. And building on the budget action, AB 1461, which was authored by Assemblymember Gonzalez and sponsored by Secretary of State Padilla, will provide for every eligible person to be registered to vote at the time he or she applies for a driver's license or state identification card, unless that person opts out. Through all these policies, California has sought to make voter registration as accessible and as seamless as possible. And while easing voter registration requirements isn't a panacea, we know that it has the potential to boost voter participation in a meaningful way. That being said, if we're going to significantly improve voter participation rates, we have to take additional steps to modernize our elections. The Assemblyman has identified specific aspects of the election process that he feels need modernizing. First, we need to examine the administrative procedures that are currently in place for our elections. And second, we need to examine the voting equipment and systems used to conduct our elections. Both are antiquated and in need of reform. As Senator Allen has discussed, his SB 450 would significantly overhaul our administrative election procedures. Last November, the Assembly member had the opportunity to visit Colorado with Senator Allen and a couple of other legislative colleagues to see how elections work in a system where voters have a variety of options of how and when they decide to vote. For voters who want to vote in person, they have the option and ability to do so over 2 weeks of voting at multiple vote centers spread throughout the community. And voters who prefer to vote at home can return their completed ballots to any of those vote centers or to numerous drop-off boxes available around the community. Giving voters multiple voting options and recognizing that not all voters have the same needs or preferences about how and when they vote is a key to boosting participation, particularly among groups that historically have been less likely to participate in elections. As we consider such significant changes to the way that Californians vote, we must ensure these changes are not only efficient and meaningful, but also comprehensive, balanced, and inclusive. Bills that were signed into law last year that will help facilitate the transition to a more modern voting experience include measures regulating the use and approval of electronic poll books and ballot on-demand systems, and establishing guidelines for vote-by-mail drop boxes. And while the Assembly member thinks these are positive changes, he believes that more can be done, new technologies can be explored, and lessons can be learned from other states to improve our elections. For example, we know that younger voters aren't turning out to vote at the same rates as other groups. Studies find that young voters are highly mobile and have the least familiarity with our system of voting, including deadlines for registering or requesting a ballot by mail. Traditional ways of doing voter education and outreach won't necessarily work with these groups, since young voters are much more likely to obtain their news from social media. We need to embrace this culture and explore ways to make our election information more mobile and accessible. Finally, if we want to improve voter participation, we need to make it a priority for the state to fund elections. During his first year as a member of the Assembly, Mr. Ridley Thomas authored legislation to require the state to reimburse counties for the costs of special elections held to fill vacancies in the legislature and in Congress. In the last several years, counties have had to spend many millions of dollars on special elections. What's more, the state has suspended all elections-related state mandates in each of the last 5 state budgets, which has taken a significant toll on county elections budgets. In turn, that means that counties have had less money to do things like voter outreach and education. So if we want to reverse the trend of declining voter participation, we need to make elections a financial priority for the state. And once again, the Assembly member regrets that he wasn't able to be here. This is an issue that he cares passionately about. And my goodness, if you ever have the opportunity to speak with him, his knowledge on the subject is voluminous and his thoughts very subtle. So it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning.
Thank you. You represented the chairman's words very nicely, but I was disappointed you didn't emulate his unique oratorical style. So, well, that was terrific. Thank you.
I was thinking about my wardrobe choices this morning.
Well, please give him our best, and we really regret
certainly will.
he wasn't able to be here. But
thank you.
So, panelists, I'm going to exercise my moderator's prerogative and throw a question out that I have been hearing discussed in the hallways over the last day and a half with regard to Senate Bill 450 that would create a ballot delivery system by mail with multiple opportunities to return that ballot and some level of consolidating our traditional precinct poll infrastructure to vote centers at which voters could vote, any one of which in the county. So one argument, we'll call it for lack of a better term, the Joe argument, is the voters have already spoken. We have very high VBM utilization. We are seeing over 50%, 60, 70% in some places, and we're operating our traditional precinct poll infrastructure and opening up empty ballot boxes at the end of Election Day because they're being used primarily as a VBM delivery drop-off point, and we just don't have the number of in-person, traditional in-person voters that we used to have. And there's a couple of counter-arguments. There's the argument that massive consolidation of the traditional precinct poll infrastructure to a small number of vote centers has the potential to result in voter disenfranchisement because where there is not a really high utilization of delivery by mail ballots, you have voters who simply won't get the word, they won't be educated, they'll be looking for that place that they voted for the last 20 years, and if they're not used to receiving a ballot in the mail, they may not see the ballot that got delivered in the mail, and then they don't have it to surrender when they show up at the vote center, and on and on. And then, of course, arguments that in rural counties particularly, but also potentially in urban counties, voters with disabilities would being asked to travel very long distances to have an accessible voting experience using accessible machines. So these are kind of two pools of thought that we hear, and I suppose the intersection is the ratio, but maybe it's other things too. So this is not to a particular panelist, but Senator, maybe you want to start and kind of address the elephant in the room.
Well, the ratio is critical. Voter education is critical, and I think ultimately this is going to be about explaining to people this new system, making sure that there's adequate funding for full explication, so people can feel really comfortable with the transition. Ultimately, we know that the current system isn't working particularly well, and that this will actually provide for a lot more access. But we are very, very sensitive to the disenfranchisement concerns, and ultimately it's about the ratio, as you say. But you got to remember, yes, there will be less polling locations, but they'll be open for a much longer period of time. We will have fully explained this to folks. They will have the vote by mail option, and those centers will be manned, or womaned by people who are fully trained, absolutely up to speed, not without all the crazy problems that Kathy.
Might still wear the fur, but
they may still wear the green fur, which I just hope you have a photograph of. But there's going to be a strong system in place for high levels of professionalism and accountability, accessibility, language access, disability access, et cetera. And so all of those concerns we are taking very seriously and incorporating into the bill.
James?
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is if you're starting from scratch, if you're building our election system from scratch today, and someone presented current law in a bill with all the stats and costs that we know come with current law, it wouldn't pass. Probably wouldn't even get one vote. And so how do I think we all agree the status quo doesn't work. And so how do you change the status quo but not increase expenditures and increase the need for resources? Because as we know, there's not going to be any new resources for ongoing election costs as far, going forward. We can get some for voting systems, but in terms of a whole new flood of money for ongoing, that's not in the books right now. And so how do you take the resources we have and provide more options for voters, right? Whether it's early voting, getting a ballot in the mail, be able to go everywhere in your county or any location in your county. How do you make that happen? And that's sort of the trick with 450 is just figuring out what's the right way to do it. The ratios, how do you figure out where to locate them? How do you educate the public on it? And I think the concept is it's going to be a more voter-friendly model. And not only for the voter-friendly model, it's going to be friendly for our GOTV campaigns. There's more options for us to get voters to cast their ballot. We can, if everyone has a ballot in their hand 28 days before Election Day, guess what? You can talk to all the voters 28 days before Election Day. I've done campaigns. I know there's a certain group that you don't talk to until the last 4 days when you're scrambling and focusing all your resources because they only vote at the polls. But if everyone has a ballot, that changes GOTV. It changes GOTV because you don't have to say, okay, do you know where this specific location is on this one day for this finite amount of hours? Do you know where that is? You can say, look, you have these 20 locations. They're open for 10 days. We're providing options not only for the voter, but for GOTV campaigns to get people out to vote. And so I think we're removing barriers on both ends. And I think, one of the discussions you brought up on accessibility, I think that's an important aspect of 450, is that we're requiring that under 450 that all voters, including voters with disabilities, can vote privately and independently. And for us, that means being able to receive, read, and mark electronic ballot, have that printed out, and send a physical copy back. But to receive, mark, and read electronically, I think that's an important part of 450 and moving the ball on accessibility to elections.
Okay. Kathy or Scott, anything to add? Or are we very good? So I'd like to invite the audience to participate in the dialogue, and we have 2 volunteers with microphones, and so we'll start at this side of the room with the gentleman in the blue shirt. So if we could have a microphone delivered there, please.
Thank you. My question would be, given the fact that, as James pointed out, there's limited resources for ongoing voter and voting efforts, how do we look at the vote center model with 10 days when the Colorado experience was that for the first 8 days, the vote centers were basically empty? the voters really only showed up the last 2 days. What is the option? What is the likelihood that we could take a look and say, you know, it's really not feasible to have those centers open that long and to have them sitting vacant? What if we just reduce the number of days that those centers were open?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we're looking at two potential ratios. One, a wider ratio for those vote centers that are open for a longer period of time before Election Day, but then have more open for Election Day or the couple days before Election Day, precisely what you said. So that's a good question. I do know that, you know, even with that change, even with these vote centers that are open for a long time and definitely underutilized, it still saved the state. You know, it dropped election costs by about a third, just because of how incredibly expensive it was to have the comprehensive precinct-based electoral system from before. So it's still going to be a cost savings. The question now becomes, you know, how do we tweak that? How do we tweak it in a way that will make sense in terms of accessibility while also making sure that we're not wasting money? And I think it's going to be I think it's really going to come down to a dual track ratio system.
Kathy?
There is definitely a lot of discussion about concentrating a larger number of early voting sites open on those last 4 days, right? Because we know that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, before Election Day is when that peak starts to happen. And that's also because in a regular, for instance, a presidential year, it's when the crescendo of ads and debates and talk, you know, about getting out to vote also happens. I think that the other piece that I'll just mention that is interesting in this conversation, and that several of our counties are already starting to pilot, right, is this notion. So we think of poll sites as being something that's open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. at a designated location, and it's designated so far in advance that I can print it on a sample ballot and mail it to you, right? And then we think of early voting sites as kind of similar, right? We think of them as designated locations that are open for a certain number of set hours, usually kind of office hours, right, that you could go into. There's a lot of discussion about voting that might happen. It's a lot of different names for it, but pop-up voting, right, that happens at designated locations, but maybe they're not from 9 to 5 p.m. Maybe they're not at a city hall, right? Maybe it's at a shopping mall, right, or a university setting, or a location where people are gathering, not because you told them to, but because that's where they're gathering, right? And I think that also starts to break the mold, right? And clearly what we're going to have to do is make sure that people know about those locations, and that, you know, it has all of the other kinds of features that we would want a normal voting center to have. But I think that the more we start to think about meeting people and voters where they are, I think the more we capture bang for our buck, and also don't tie people down to something that's expensive and rigid.
I think something to remember in terms of the Colorado experience and the way they're moving to reduce the amount of vote centers, because you're right, they're in Colorado, less people are showing up to the vote centers in the early days than they expected. But we're starting off on a different foot than Colorado. When Colorado moved to the reforms, they were on average statewide 70% permanent absentee voters, and they also had at the municipal level all vote by mail elections. And so there's a little difference there in terms of where we're at in vote by mail and where they're at. And so that's sort of the back and forth in the policy discussion is what's the right balance where, you know, Colorado can be the inspiration, but what's the California model look like? Mm-hmm. And it's really tough given, you know, the diversity of counties geographically, population-wise, you know, big, small. I mean, you have small rural counties, you have big rural counties. You have big urban counties, you have small urban counties. And so it's really tough to find the right model. But we have to look at our own experiences and our own data and just sort of use, you know, Colorado as an inspiration because they have started off on a different place.
Okay, Ted, there's a microphone coming behind you.
I can't let go.
Oh, you can't let go? Okay, cool. First off, I just wanted to say that, you know, I think that coming from the disability perspective, with both James at the Secretary of State's office, Senator Allen, we've had some healthy discussions, but I really appreciate this administration and your committee and you, Senator Allen, for I think both of you have been very earnestly, involved in wanting to help, and it's been a partnership in social justice. So thank you, first of all, for that. I want to kind of switch to a new motor voter because my organization does support SB 450, and James said the buzzwords anyways, read and mark. So I don't need to ask about accessible vote by mail. But this tablet or this piece of technology that's going to be created, for our folks, some of them are registering for at the DMV for a driver's license, some for a state ID, some for a registered hand stamp. There's all sorts of applications. So people with disabilities will be coming in, being automatically registered to vote. And, we have concerns because the makers of these consoles are also the makers of pay points in stores like Walmart. And there's a lawsuit out there because the Walmart one is inaccessible. What measures are being taken to make sure that organizations like mine and Disability Rights California and our folks from the grassroots that contest are going to be a part of the process to make sure that those consoles or that technology is accessible for people with disabilities?
Sure. Yeah, I think the DMV is not looking at necessarily new technology, looking at technology that's already there. And they have I think various points they're looking at, whether it's the signature pad, which you talked about, which could be problematic, or the touch screens that are now used to take the test. But we've pushed it with them, and I think they understand that they need to make sure that it's accessible. And I know the stakeholders that are involved in rolling out this. Like I said, first it's this paperless system that'll be deployed next couple of months, and then that'll be sort of the infrastructure for the automatic provision in 2017. I think there's a good amount of time to make sure they're doing it right, but we're stressing with them as well. It needs to be accessible.
Honestly, the DMV is hard to work with. It's a gigantic bureaucracy. They love the way they do things. They love the fact that they make you check in at multiple locations. They're attached to their piece of paper form that's the DL44 that triggers everything. And maybe we just need to talk offline about if it's not accessible, we go back at it. So
we find over and over again, if our organizations are not actually at the table and involved, and if our grassroots aren't brought in as testers, what ends up happening is an inaccessible product, even though everyone thinks it's accessible and it passes some accessibility standards. And I want to save us from that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want to save us from the experience we had of taking down OVR and building it back up.
Sometimes that's what you need to do.
Thank you, Ted. I think, is there a question over on the right side of the room? Yes, Roz, please.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Rosalind Gold. I'm with NALEO, the NALEO Educational Fund. I first of all just want to echo Ted's comments about thanking the senator, thanking the assembly member, and thanking the Secretary of State and James for your commitment to the vision of a model that gives people as many options to vote as possible and makes those options as accessible. And also thank you so much for including us and the language minority community in the dialogue. The comment that I just wanted to make and also see, the response is that as the dialogue about the vote center model moves forward, I think that emphasizing cost savings, while I think is critical, and nobody wants to make our elections more expensive, I think, it's also helpful to talk about what is going to be needed to do this in a way. This is going to be a very different way of holding elections in the state. So talking a bit more about what's needed to do this in a way that makes sure that vote centers and all of these systems are accessible, and particularly to people who are, citizens who are not yet fully proficient in English. So, for example, we were very pleased to see that There was responsiveness to requiring counties that go down this road to do a plan, a public plan, and get input on where the location of those vote centers, drop-off models should be, what should be the outreach that's done. Another issue for us is that if indeed somebody can vote at any place in a particular county, then you may need to think about how you're going to deploy poll workers, bilingual poll workers, in places you haven't had to deploy them before. So I just wanted to ask, how can we also include in this dialogue really the fact that there is going to be, an effort to invest in outreach, invest in the hard thinking and getting the community input that's needed to make this work for all Californians.
It's a strong part of this package, and it's something that the leadership in the legislature cares a great deal about too. They care a lot about making sure that we do everything we can to enfranchise language minority voters, et cetera. So we hear you loud and clear, and it's all coming together. It's a very, very important part of this package. Is this voter education component. And I just continue to encourage and welcome and hope for your sustained engagement in helping to craft this.
I think what the bill's going to end up where there's going to be a strong requirement for voter education. And, we're looking to learn some lessons from San Mateo and their election last year, which was pretty close to 450 in terms of vote centers and everyone gets a ballot. And I haven't seen the details of it, but I've heard they had a pretty robust education campaign and trying to, multiple times reach out to the voter to make sure they understand, what the new process is. So we're hoping there's some good lessons to be learned there. And so the way that worked is, the San Mateo had a certain amount of savings they had from moving this model, and they took a good part of that savings and they put it to educating the voter. So I think the counties will have some resources to do voter education. Our office, is going to do our best to get resources to do voter education. And I'm waiting to see the grant funding request to the James Irvine Foundation from groups in this room to ask for funds to do voter education when 450 takes place. And I think the other important part of 450 we haven't talked about is the, really unprecedented public access to how the plans are written. And, the intent is you're going to have a public process where, the county registrars are meeting with their groups in their counties to develop the plan. The plan is then put on, displayed at a public meeting. There's public input. There's a chance to revise the plan, and then another meeting to finalize the plan. And so there's a long public process that doesn't occur today. And that happens, a good chunk, it has to happen a good chunk of time before the election. And so advocates on the ground will be able to know and understand what the thinking of the registrar is, how they're putting the plan together. They can, request public input. You guys are going to have a lot of access to how these plans are written. And I think that's an important part. And so you can go in and suggest the best ways in that specific county how they should outreach to specific voters in specific communities. And that's really been, I think, one of the least talked about parts of the bill, but I think one of the most important parts of the bill as well.
So just a follow-on, James. You weren't actually suggesting that the state is not going to fund outreach and education programs for SB 450 implementation, were you?
What do you mean?
You asked for the James Irvine Foundation to.
Right. No, you're gonna have the county, you're gonna have our office, and I think you're gonna have a lot of groups that want to, put in requests. So
yeah,
it has to be part of the bill.
But that'll be part of the state
Absolutely.
implementation plan is to fund that outreach and education.
There's going to be a strong requirement of counties in our office to do education.
It has to be, yeah.
So a quick question now. You have a lot of regulations to promulgate, James. Your office has really been tasked with implementing a lot of new regulations. And there's a second wave of legislation coming, building on the energy of this new Secretary of State. And is your office going to do both? That is, are you going to absorb a second wave of reform legislation, a second package of bills, while timely implementing and promulgating new regulations that are part of the previous session's legislative package? Or are you looking for a pause or an intermission of some sort? And then secondly, maybe to the senator, it's been stated that the very low voter turnout, worse since World War II in 2014, really provided a lot of legislative momentum for reform. And because of this competitive presidential cycle with no incumbent in the White House, we expect this to be a high turnout year. Do you expect that's going to in any way deflate legislative enthusiasm for reform? So, James, do you want to start?
We have a lot on our plate, that's for sure. But we have amazing staff in our office that are working really, really hard to get all these things done, and I don't see any hiccups. We're on time for a lot of the projects that are in our bailiwick, and I want to recognize some of them first. You guys want to wave your hands back there? Come on, Jana, Joanna, Steven, Roberto. This is the team that we're rolling out vocal, and that's going well. We're putting together the e-poll books and ballot on demand regulations. Those will be, I think, on public display here soon. You see, we rewrote the Voter Bill of Rights, and that's, I think, on public display as well. We're moving along, and in terms of workload, when you go to the big one of new motor voter, that's a lot of bird dogging on the DMV. And so it's not necessarily on our end a lot of internal extra work. It's mostly just making sure it gets rolled out correctly by the other agency. And the same.
For the first time, I think advocates and folks in the Secretary of State's office and the legislature, we're largely rowing in the same direction. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, that means that we're sort of playing tag team on a lot of these things, right? Mm-hmm. And although we don't, there are still details that we're still kind of hammering out. A lot of things like new motor voter implementation, there's a lot of communication and a lot of collaboration to make sure that the system gets implemented right, and then that it potentially gets monitored, and if there needs to be changes, that we're coming back to it and cleaning it up. And I think that that's a testament to groups like FOCE kind of bringing together this unusual collaboration of election officials, advocates, lawmakers together to do the right thing.
So Senator James said, pile on.
Yeah, I would just say that.
Right, Jana?
Yeah, no, I mean, to answer your question, Vince, I don't get the sense that interest is dampened, but I think it's going to continue. We've got very interested leadership from Secretary of State's office and a number of the members of the legislature. Kind of, it's like the drought in some ways. Just because it rains once doesn't mean that we, don't have a long-term water problem. We very much do. And so I think people get that. I think the 14 election results really did leave a lot of people shocked and woken up to this problem that we have. So it's going to take all of us to just keep pushing, even if there's a higher turnout election in November. The broader problem hasn't gone away.
I think the key to that, and I think you're right in terms of, I think the interest will still be there, even if there's a high turnout in 2016. But I think the reason why is we have some amazing legislators that are committed to doing this. And the political headwinds that Senator Allen and Assemblymember Gonzalez and Assemblymember Ridley Thomas have gone against to get these reforms passed and get them to where they are today are strong. And they have fought harder than I've seen a lot of legislators fight, and they're doing a great job. And I think that's why we're going to see sustained efforts on these reforms.
Panelists, any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
I see some passionate people who want to. Could you just give a quick shout your questions?
We'll get a microphone to you here so the audience can hear your comment or question.
Maybe we can hear all three, and then we can just
stand up
and
say your question together.
real quick.
Yeah.
I work for an organization, the Central Coast Cause, that we do engagement with, just the type of worker or type of voters that we're concerned about with, SB 450, the immigrant grandmother in rural farm worker town, and we're really excited. I mean, we think this bill can make a huge impact in increasing voter turnout in the community to be organized. But we know, of course, as people have raised, there's going to be a lot of difficulty, challenges, confusion rolling it out. So I wanted to know specifically kind of when, where, and how can organizations like ours that are actually on the ground in these communities kind of engage with the legislative process with your office as this moves forward at, I'm sure, the rapid pace that it will.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's hear the next two, and then we'll all finalize.
I work for United Cerebral Palsy, and we've been doing education and outreach with voters for a very long time. And accessibility is definitely the key. Since we've been doing the outreach, we've got a 98% of those people who vote. That's huge.
Wow.
So I really love what you said about the accessibility, and I want to kind of let you know that people that need accessibility are already having to travel very long distances to find an accessible place to vote. And then when they get there, it's not always accessible because the machine, the audio ballot booth, isn't always set up and working. So if we could all support this fully, if there's full access, you're going to get support from the community. We've got people who actually are signed up as poll workers who would love to work there that have disabilities, as well as they want to vote in person. They want to have a private and independent vote. And you've just won me over today. I commit to work forward on it.
Thank you. Thank you. We're committed. And Jonathan, and then we.
Go.
Not Jonathan.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Kathy Zhang. I'm the new member of the Language Access Advisory Committee and also a member of a public Chinese radio station. And I was talking about how to bring like traditions to the families that without tradition. And I have to reflect on the previous panel, which is, I think, the one of the most powerful panel that we had for this conference, reducing barriers to the voting booth. People, I really was moved by and inspired by the panelists who shared how, the barriers to them was broke down and teared down so that they can become the full-time voter, as American. I think one of the barriers for the new immigrants, we always talk about language and cultural difference, but they made me realize there's another one, which is more fundamental probably, is the civic realization. I don't know how to express it. It's like what mean to be American. Mm-hmm. How important is it for one to be able to make decision independently. So I just wanted to make this, share this, and also to see how we can include this in this conversation as of how to break down the barriers for the new immigrants and to help them really we can how to build this new tradition for them and motivate their participation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jonathan, and then we should probably,
James mentioned in his remarks voter motivation, and Kathy mentioned giving people a sense that their vote counts. And so I want to speak to an issue that wasn't mentioned here or I think throughout the conference, which is money in politics. If people are going to turn out to vote, they have to believe that their democratic institutions work for them. And I think if you talk to regular voters, fewer and fewer have that sense. They feel as though money calls the tune and our politics are swamped by big money. And it's not just a matter of faith in our institutions, but I think it's a social justice issue, because as long as money calls the tune, communities of color and young people and other marginalized communities are going to be at a structural disadvantage. So what are the policy solutions on the table right now, set aside overturning Citizens United, et cetera? What are the policy solutions on the table in California that can either amplify the voice of small donors and regular voters or limit the role of big money in our politics?
Short question.
We're going to start a second conference in 5 minutes on money in politics. So
why don't you start with how to engage in some of the accessibility language issues?
And I think, to go to the sort of the process around where we're at with 450 is, for a while we were waiting for suggested amendments from legislative staff to give to us to consider, and it's been quite a while. It's been about 6 or 8, 9 months we've been waiting, and we finally got them, and we're negotiating with the leadership staff. And I think once we sort of get a sense of what makes the leadership staff in both houses comfortable with 450, we'll start engaging again with all the community groups, and we'll be reaching out to you guys.
And Sam Liu, my one of my staff is here, and we can make sure that each of you have our office's information. So if you want to engage directly with our office, and I'm sure Senator Riley Thomas feels the same way.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Darren Chesson is the chief consultant for the Senate Elections Committee and is kind of helping, is sort of my point person on 450. So I would encourage you to be a part of that and maybe send someone to the hearing, for example, on Tuesday, and we can get the ball rolling on that. Money in politics, great question. We're about to do a bill on this.
Yeah.
So talk to us about it.
Oh, okay. We are really excited because I think, key to this is this question about, quite honestly, I mean, 2 days ago, Senator Yee he just pled guilty, right? Got a sentence of 5 years, but we probably know that it could have been longer because, and he said in some of the transcripts, he was under enormous pressure to raise money to run as Secretary of State.
Kathy, I'm sorry, would you hold your mic up here, please?
Sure.
Yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
sorry. And maybe that pressure pushed him to fundraise in crazy ways, right? We all know the stories. Bazooka, shrimp boy chow, I had to say it. But I think that, a lot of people who are running, candidates, they may not go to that extent, right? Communicating with organized crime and selling access to your office. But I think that a lot of candidates feel that pressure to raise the money. And so the question is, can we change that dynamic so that you're not always chasing the largest donor, but raising from your constituents? And can we also incentivize people, to get off that fundraising track? And one way to do that is to promote innovation when it comes to public financing, right? In California, the bill that we're talking about now that will eventually hopefully become a referred measure would open up that opportunity to innovate in California and really, I think, put us in the lead position. We're seeing a lot of different models, some New York City, some in Maine, some in Seattle. And what we say is let those ideas flourish. Let's try them out. Let's see which ones work. And let's make our state a model, just as we have been for citizens redistricting, to also make it a place where regular citizens truly participate in that process. And we take the cloud of corruption off of our legislature and maybe reinstill a little bit more trust in those people that we elect to office. So keep your eye out for that. It's 1107, SB 1107.
And it's hard. We're looking at the current ban on public financing.
Yeah.
In the PRA and trying to open up more options to local government, cities, and then indeed the state if it wants to make changes in that area. But right now, of course, the PRA is tying a lot of people's hands who want to make innovations on the local level.
But people are excited. I mean, this is top of mind. It has been a long time since people talked about money in politics or campaign finance, without hiding their face. So I think that we're all talking about it. So just know that this is. Sorry, James, I know that you've got a full plate, but this is probably the next thing that's coming down the pike that we're going to have to work on together.
Explain the acronym.
Oh, the Political Reform Act.
Right, PRA, the Political Reform Act, that's right. Political Reform Act. So that was, so as you recall, there were two ballot measures. So when the Political Reform Act passed, there were two ballot measures that were identical, except for this difference in terms of public financing. And the one that banned public financing got a few more votes. And so that was what went into effect that year. It was back in
This was 1988.
Right? 88, right.
And it was specifically because the other ballot measure would have created public financing. And both passed, one passed with more votes.
And so that was the one that went into effect. And so now, even if general law cities want to put in place innovative public financing options, they are not allowed to under the very Political Reform Act that's supposed to be keeping our system cleaner. So we want to change that. We want to provide for more flexibility. And we're part of a coalition that's looking at this and several other things. We had a big hearing about this right here in LA, actually, just a couple months ago. So I invite you to go back and watch that if this is an area of interest. But we really want to see if there's a way to help, at least at the local level, for more innovation. At the state level, it's obviously been a really tough slog. I mean, for whatever reason, the voters just don't respond to this issue. I mean, there was a great measure that was on the 2006 ballot, and it lost 4-1. Now, maybe with the changes in the Citizens United and some of the things happening nationally and some of the disaffection, maybe part of what we're seeing now with this presidential election, maybe maybe there's a change in the mood, and so we want to allow for local government to create more possibilities, and maybe we can then push it back up at the state level again.
And to bring it back to elections, because I know this is about the future of California elections, how this all connects back is ultimately, let's say we're really successful with 1461 or we pass 450, and you've got a whole new group of voters who are registered, but you still have to overcome that issue of, do I want to vote? Do I feel like the ballot that I cast is for a candidate that I'm excited about and not just sort of begrudgingly going forward with? And are there interesting choices out there? Will my vote matter? And ultimately, do I feel like the person who's elected will respond to my needs as a regular voter, as a constituent, not just to the needs of the major donor that they had to ask because they had to run a campaign? And if we can turn that dynamic from one of cynicism to trust, I think we overcome that last little barrier. It's not a little barrier, that last barrier that's sort of built into our electoral system that keeps people feeling like, yeah, I'm registered, but what's the point? They're all crooks anyways, right? You don't want that. We want people to feel like the system is good and it's worth investing my time to go out and cast a ballot for.
Well, that kind of brings us full circle
so that's
to,
the full
to what
circle.
James said about we could have the perfect election system with the best voter registration solutions, the best voting option solutions, the best voting information, but we still have to solve voter motivation. We still have to deal with that apathy of people who say they're all corrupt, you can't fight City Hall, my vote doesn't count, voting only encourages them, and these terrible cliches that just really undermine.
They came a little too easily to you.
I've heard them all for 30 years, but so I have two. I'm sorry, James.
Quickly, I think there's two questions I wanted to about accessibility and immigrants. I wanted to just quickly address.
Okay, please, as quickly as we can, because we're way over time. Yes, please.
So for accessibility, one of the exciting conversations around 450 now, and what folks are being more open to, is the idea of pop-up mobile vote centers,
right?
And being able to bring the vote center to the people instead of just stationary location. And so I think that concept is going to end up in 450. It just needs to be sort of fleshed out and further discussed. But I think you're going to see that, and that's going to increase accessibility as well.
Imagine food truck delivering ballots.
And then on the immigration side, I think it is a big challenge. And if you've ever done voter registration at a new citizen swearing-in ceremony, it's chaotic and it's really hard to register voters there and engage them and talk about elections. But I think we can actually look to the K-12 model for English language learners. There's a lot of school districts that have a program where if the student's an English language learner, most often the parent is too, and probably is even less proficient. And so they have programs where they'll teach the parent English alongside the student. I think you can use that as a model to teach civic engagement and how you can, get the student motivated to vote, they can get the parent motivated to vote, and you can sort of start overcoming that lack of voting tradition.
Very good. Please join me in thanking this wonderful panel. And Jackie, if you and Astrid, and please grab Stephanie, would step forward for just a moment. Join me again, by the way, in thanking the James Irvine Foundation for their generous support of this conference. They're our sponsors. And we thank, of course, the California Endowment for the use of this magnificent facility. They're terrific. And then the staff of future California elections, Stephanie Jimenez, Jackie Wu, and of course our Deputy Director, Astrid Garcia Ochoa. Thank you so much. Without these three individuals, this conference simply would not happen, and they've done an absolutely exceptional job. So please take a moment to thank them. And then finally, our volunteers, and especially our Conference Planning Committee. And again, if you're on the Conference Planning Committee, stand up. But thank you to the Conference Planning Committee. The Conference Planning Committee are named on the first page of your program, and please thank them as well. They did an outstanding job. Thank you all for participating in the 2016 Future California Elections Conference. I hope this was informative. I hope it was inspiring. I hope you're leaving here with a lot of work to do, because we all have a lot of work to do. And let's continue the dialogue and the collaboration. Thank you all, and we'll see you next year.